Full house that we built as a cottage. Kids in college. Next to the pool. And then bragging about this for there one day. And I saw the sign out of the front yard. Good point, maybe. I told a lady I talked to you. Maybe a month later, she came back and said, "Are you the one?" Yeah, but I don't know. I did it a couple of years, giving me a piece of mind. Still bragging about it. Seems like everybody. I agree.
You okay sitting there?
So far, so good.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know what you wanted to do with that.
Yeah, I wanted to give it to Missy Gentry, see if she can help.
Okay, she'll be in here.
Okay.
And anything you don't need, tell me, we'll just.
That's
throw
my
it.
stack.
Okay, that's the
Throwing out.
garbage, that one.
Councilman?
Hello.
Your mail's on the big house.
Okay.
You know, you're ready.
How are
to
you?
tear up the house we're taking on the ninth.
Yes.
It's always the second.
Thank you. I'm gonna stay to about 5. Joe's gonna circle back, pick me up.
Oh, I'm parking. I forgot you were I'm parking.
Oh, no, he'll park in my parking spot. Right there, parking. He'll find a spot. Hey, Sam, how are you? Sorry, I'm kind of encroaching over there.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Go back again.
Well, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. I just thought I was. I'll hang around for a while, see if y'all have any questions.
Yeah, we nice to put that together.
Good. How you doing?
Good, good.
Meeting now.
It's been 5 months. And I'm so tired of it. Just like,
We didn't.
well, I wish, if it could have, we have a problem. It's got a little, I almost wish it had all. We just leave it path through every room to get the snacks and everything everywhere.
meeting, they talked about the thing, they were talking about the market. What they say, you want me to call and tell her what I told you? Or you want to tell her? About Rob working on keeping the market around.
I pulled this, but it's too small for me to read, so I gotta get a larger version.
He's working on it.
You got a larger one?
Can't say that they do
Larger font?
that whole deal with the screen. You really should.
Make it, I get a photocopy.
Well, I think there's got to be some of that education probably could be stronger.
All right,
You know what I mean?
I think we got everybody who's gonna be here.
Go ahead. Well,
Yeah. I'll plug it in.
If they don't get it.
We're missing here.
That's what
No, sir, I think
Oh, it's Ed, it's Ed, it's Ed.
it's here that can
You okay?
haven't had any.
well, I get some information. If I get some information on that shoe, I'll let you know. I'm gonna text you Leslie
I was
number, right?
gonna, I plan to go by her house today.
For your
Email.
That is. That's why I want to tell you yesterday. But I'm gonna send you Leslie's contact information. All
right, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Hi, Dora, how are you?
I just meant to look at that. Didn't I give you Greg Park?
Get a
Don't
copy.
you have all of Greg Park's?
It makes sense, it makes sense.
Okay, I don't know why I guess. I'm not talking about the preserve. I'm talking about Greg Park. I'm asking a question about Greg Park. I think you have Greg Park.
Figure out.
I have the preserve Greg Park. I'm positive. On Forest Drive.
Yeah,
You wanna do it even earlier?
I don't
Maybe
think so.
maybe on the presentation.
I think I lost
My
it.
life folks go home early. Us too. Yeah, no.
There's a really big one. Yeah.
Can somebody check and see
All right, let's get started, y'all.
Greg Park, what district Greg Park's in?
Yours or Mr. Dora?
Uh-huh, I think I gave it to him. It used to be in mine, but he says I didn't, so. Just kidding. I meant to check him out before I came.
All right.
We had debris,
Krista.
All of
Krista.
the debris was there on
Krista.
right, on Romford,
Right. No, not wrong.
Delverton.
Delver.
You called me one, then
Hey,
you came back
Krista.
and called me another one.
Delver.
Sorry.
And down here,
So it's the valve for that.
So it's gotta be-
Joey, we did talk about it.
this line's got to be broken.
Right.
It's not long
Delverton.
I wait till it goes dead and I'll plug it up and put it down for a while.
I think that's Delver.
Delverton.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
That's the calculation. That's the number.
Okay. Okay. What you expect the need prospectively?
And then when Whole Street's up and down.
I just want to make sure, thinking forward, I wouldn't allow. Okay. Hey, Missy. Hey, Madam City Manager, Madam Clerk.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Mr. McDowell, Mr. Duval,
Present.
Mr. Badura.
Here.
Ms. Cloud,
Here.
Mr. Vine, Mr. Davis.
Here.
Mayor Benjamin.
Here.
Mayor Benjamin and council, we wanted to take this opportunity today to really celebrate the positive. There's some very much so still impacted areas of our city as a result of the floods in October. We have been working tirelessly with you all to come up with a responsible plan for this city as to how to approach various funding streams to address not only the internal infrastructure needs that you will continue to hear me talk about, but also the individual need for assistance and recovery that we know your constituents have across the city, but in particularly some very hard, majorly impacted areas of the city. We know there was an effort to have an actual tour of those areas, and we hope to still do that if that's what you all would like for us to do. If y'all could have a discussion about that before we leave today to give us some direction on that. But in lieu of that for today, And with the very positive announcement of the almost $20 million in HUD recovery funding that the city is receiving as a direct allocation, we wanted to spend the majority of our time talking about these funding opportunities and how we begin to approach a lot of things that we need to get done as a result of the floods. And we want to say thank you to all of you for your advocacy in assisting us in getting that funding. I know Mayor Benjamin made trips to Washington and met with HUD officials, and I really do think that we're seeing the fruit of that labor. And I want to say that our staff is rearing and willing and able to administer those funds and be very compliant with how we do that over the course of the next 90 days as we put together an action plan. So with all that said, we'll start with a presentation. There are pictures of some of the flood impacted areas that we will try to just show quickly. I know Ms. Plow may have to leave, and we'll try to get to the meat of the discussion.
And I will tell you, Teresa, sitting with Secretary Castro and probably 14 different people from HUD, really the only thing that we really had to sell being a past stewardship of HUD dollars in various formats, but CDBG most importantly. So our record of properly handling those funds, not just now under Deborah's leadership, but on the way back to your leadership and everything in between, was really, I think, what put us over the top. So, I mean, I think it's important to know we've been great stewards of CDBG funds, and it inured to our benefit in making the case. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I want to thank you, Mayor, but what I really want to say is thank you for your leadership and the council that got behind your efforts to make a difference in getting resources that are badly needed in this community, and the staff. I mean, I know we're going to see all kinds of wonderful things that you've been working on and things you're proposing that we approach this flood disaster in a very different and positive way for all of our constituents. And I just want to say, being an area of the city, representing an area of the city that was so dramatically impacted, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
With that, we'll go ahead and just roll into the presentation. You do have a copy of the notebook that we had planned on putting together for the bus tour. Yes, ma'am?
Can y'all turn the camera around so I can see?
Can you see the board, Ms. Devine?
I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we will go through the notebook real quick, just so you'll see what you have. You have an index. The first tab is the route we were going to drive. So if you wanted to take it on yourself to drive that route, you can certainly do that. And some of the pictures you'll see today are what we would have seen on the route. The second tab is a series of maps that really show what's going on in each area of the city, and we'll show examples of that shortly, but we didn't pull all of the maps up into the presentation. But it shows building permits issued, demolition permits issued. It just really shows the status of a lot of the individual properties. And then you will have a tab with a spreadsheet that follows that is the same information, just in a spreadsheet format instead of a map format. Following that, you'll have information about the state's hazard mitigation funding, and then you will have the cities of Columbia proposed hazard mitigation projects, the HUD announcement from yesterday that we're so pleased about, and then your last tab will be information on all of the funding opportunities that we're seeking as a city. And my pointer is not working. Let's see. There you go. We're going to scroll through these pictures. To get us back to October, I really wanted to show a few of the pictures of the flood, and we'll do this very quickly. You've heard us talk a lot about the head gates. This is the head gates of the canal. So this is really where our canal begins and where a lot of the damage occurred to our canal.
That was during the flood.
Absolutely. All of these pictures are during the flood. Yeah.
That's
So that's the
Coffer
head
Dam?
gate structure.
For those of you who've never seen that before, it's a pretty nice little park of sorts there.
Oh, yeah, you can walk across it.
Yeah, it's not there right now.
People fish off of the Coffer Dam.
Right. This is a picture of the actual breach that occurred down at the far end of the canal, closest to Adventure, and is the area that, as you hear us talk a lot about, we've got to restore that to a pre-existing or better condition. This is our wastewater treatment plant. You've heard us talk about that a lot as well, and surrounded by water, our employees were accessing the plant from the interstate, sort of getting out on the side of the interstate in really hard conditions and navigating that water. This was probably the worst of it, but several times since the flood, we have had this reoccurring, so we've had very limited access multiple times since October. These are some of the pictures of the personal property damage. Very devastating. I know you've all seen these pictures, but just getting you back to those early morning hours of the flood, and then the debris. As you recall, we collected 3,800 tons of material from the street side, and that was not garbage. That was people's livelihood. That was their memories and their valuables that they had to place on the side of the street. So some more pictures of the flood damage. Again, just a few more. And then back to the canal area and looking at the river and the canal. And this is our Coble Plaza area where it goes underneath Gervais Street Bridge over to the other side. And you can see.
When do we expect that to be open again? I got a question today about that.
We are working on it. We would expect no later than April 1st. And if earlier, we will certainly open it earlier. Very aware that there's a lot of need to open that park, a lot of interest, and we're working very hard to do that. So we want to talk about recovery. That's really why we're here today. Want to show you some pictures of what's going on in the neighborhoods. Again, you'll have these maps in your handout and just an illustration of the type of information. The dots represent on the side, you'll see demolition permits or building permits or different types of activities, properties that received or had substantial damage. You'll see those identified as well. And you have those maps for the entire city. I'm going to go back. This is the Lake Catherine.
Looks like Burwell.
Actually, that's the Burwell area. That's right. And then this is the Lake Catherine, Wood Lake area.
Wood Lake,
So just
yeah.
to point you where we are.
Little Lake Catherine, Big Lake Catherine.
These are some pictures of properties that there used to be a structure sitting on those properties. They have now been demolished. Some of these, we may know what's going back. Some of these, all they have done so far is receive their demolition permit. So we really don't have good indication if they're going to rebuild or not. That is evolving daily. So every single day people come into the office. So every bit of information we're giving you is up to date as we know it, but every day it does change. These are structures that are being elevated, significant structures being elevated. There's a lot of them out there. So far, every structure that is being elevated has benefited from the ICC funding, which is increased costs of compliance. So that's a process that starts with us and then goes to FEMA to get an additional portion of money.
So how much money would somebody receive?
It's an additional $30,000, but it does not exceed the $250,000 limit. So if a property had only benefited from $150,000 from the flood insurance, they could receive the maximum amount, but it will not take them above the $250,000.
What happens if they had no insurance, no flood insurance?
They're not eligible for ICC funding.
Great.
How many of those property, can I ask
Double
questions?
whammy.
I'm sorry. oh,
You
wanna
you
finish?
can, and some of that either we're going to have to
Okay.
follow up on.
Okay, go ahead.
So far, again, every property being elevated has received the ICC funding. These are examples of houses that are being rehabbed or renovated. So there's a lot of properties that are not having to elevate that have been able to be rehabbed, and some of those people are living in already. So other examples of those properties. There's a lot of other ones out there that so far they're still trying to figure it out. They don't know what they're going to do. The one exception, the property up on the far right, that one is being rehabbed. But all of these other properties are sort of in that in-between stage of trying to figure it out. So, as we get updates or we hear from these property owners, we'll certainly keep our records up to date and those spreadsheets can be updated. But there are a significant amount of properties that have either been gutted or boarded up that is still yet to be determined.
Do we have the number of properties that were impacted?
It is Dana in here? Number of properties impacted is 450.
Yeah, that had a substantial.
Right.
Or any damage.
And to date, there's around 250 that have received some form of a building permit. And remember, some of those may just be HVAC units, or it may be minor. It may not be a complete renovation, but there have been around 250 building permits issued.
I'm curious about this because when I looked at the information from Nashville, they had like 11,600 properties impacted. So are we so small compared to what happened
This
there?
was downtown flooding, much more.
Is that, okay. I mean, that's just,
Well, and the numbers we're giving you are just city limits. So obviously, there was a greater impact if you
I
look
got
at the
you.
whole region as well. Waterway debris, as y'all are starting to get a lot of these inquiries, there's a lot of waterway debris out there that needs to be addressed. We have successfully worked with NRCS to secure some funding. You'll hear a little bit about that shortly. $770,000 to address waterway debris. We are also working with the Corps of Engineers. It's yet to be determined if that's a funding source we're going to seek because of the delay in actually being able to receive that money. It's about a 24-month process, and this debris really needs to come out of there before that. So we'll talk about some other funding options. We have not signed the agreement with NRCS yet. We cannot perform the work until that agreement's signed. But we're hoping by the end of March that our agreement will be signed. There have been some areas that citizens have gone in and removed debris, and then some other areas that we may have addressed, but there's a significant amount out there. There's another picture that shows a lot of that debris as well.
you keep referring to an agreement with
NRCS, it's the acronym, Dana?
Natural conservation. Resource conservation.
It's a group, it's a federal agency that you'll hear us talk to.
The USDA.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
If FEMA will only fund a project that does not have other funding opportunities, so we have to seek every opportunity prior to submitting to FEMA. So NRCS is a entity that statewide received $3 million, and we have been approved for 770, but again, we have to execute all of the documents and make that final, but very
That's
pleased with
for
that. This
debris?
is, ma'am?
That's for debris?
It's for waterway debris
Waterway.
removal. This is really an area that a combined effort from the city and county is needed. I know we need to coordinate on everything, but with waterway debris, if we remove some of the blockages, we could potentially cause flooding elsewhere, so we really need to address that jointly and make sure that, that it's done as a system and not independent of each other. And staff is talking on a regular basis with the county, so feel like that's something we can accomplish, but certainly any support from council or encouragement to their council would be beneficial as well. There's some commercial properties. This is another example of city and county. The subway is in the city limits. I think that's the Title Max is not in the city limits. So we're working through this. There's a lot of questions about, can these properties rebuild? What's the time frame? I will tell you, the owner of Subway is trying very hard to figure out a way to rebuild. From a floodplain standpoint, it may be possible. From a zoning standpoint, it's very unlikely. So we're working through that dynamic. We are trying to make that decision happen pretty quickly. There will likely be a fence coming up around Subway, similar to what you see across the street, just from a safety precaution. That's something that the city has reached out to the owner and requested that a fence go up.
About the building behind the subway.
Which one's Title Max and which one's Title Loan? I don't. Okay, Title Max is county. The Title Loan is similar situation, that they need to figure out if they can meet current zoning code, even if they can meet floodplain. So that's being worked out right now. And collaboration with the county. We talked a little bit about corridor plans and thinking long-term. This is an area that ideally would not have these buildings on it long-term. And in the corridor plan that the city adopted a few years ago, this would not be a subway and a title loan place. But obviously, there's personal property rights that they need to be able to work through and figure out if they can meet all the requirements to rebuild.
Excellent green space.
Where is the city limits on the Title Max side? Is the road that goes up to Staples and Bilo, the city limits?
The Bilo is in the city. I believe there's one vacant lot that is not in the city. Where's Robert? And then, yeah, it's a donut hole. It's one of those areas that
The
we,
Title Max property itself is not in the city.
And I'm not sure the lot
Either
behind
side
it
it
is
is, I
in the
think.
city.
Either
You
side.
think it is, the vacant lot, where they do the tree thing?
Give him mitigation, get him out of there.
That is one lot.
want to talk about
Goes up far.
Lost Creek Drive for a minute. This is one area we were actually not going to take the bus tour to, but you've heard us talk about Lost Creek, and the picture on the top left was immediately after the flood. There was a collapse. There were some vehicles stranded. There's a lot of work going on. This was a project that we've been pretty aggressive about. A major road is closed. There's only one access into Chestnut Hill, and it's the back access. We're working through this. There's been some development this week that additional soil borings are needed, so we may be coming forth with some additional information. These are some other pictures. I told Robert, I've ridden by that area a lot. I had no idea these massive structures were underneath the road. I mean, this really is a big undertaking, and the more we can get this type of photo out there, I think the more the residents will understand this isn't just a simple road repair. This is a pretty major project. So we're working to get that addressed.
But that's been a very, as Mr. Davis knows, a very concerned community, as they should be, and we will make sure that we keep them updated with these new developments, Mr. Davis.
There was one question on that. I got, just mentioned it to Robert. That road will be replaced at the same height,
Same elevation?
same elevation?
Most likely. I mean, give or take.
Give or take a foot.
Yeah, I mean, there's no intention of going down or up significantly.
I thought we were gonna go up a little. Probably won't.
Contemplated it if it was to be a mitigation project, but we're still looking at it now.
We should know more by the end of next week, Mr. Davis, and our intent was to get with you and get with the Chestnut Hill community, and obviously brief all of council, but we certainly recognize their interest of understanding what's going on in the time frame. Want to talk about hazard mitigation options. The tab 4 in your book is a copy of what the state has produced as far as hazard mitigation projects. It is estimated there will be $36 million for hazard mitigation projects across the entire state. They have divvied that up into different categories. So we wanted to provide you the information as far as how they perceive they will use that money, and this is a competitive grant process, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as well. But before we roll into the tab 5, we wanted to make sure you understood it is a very limited pot of money for the whole state. Any entity can apply for it. You do not have to be in the area that was impacted by the flood. Obviously, we believe flood-impacted areas should carry more priority, but there's no guarantee of that. So if there's some other areas, other municipalities or counties that have mitigation projects, they too are eligible to apply for it. Tab 5, you may want to pull that spreadsheet out. This is a list of the projects city staff has identified for that pot of money. Obviously, these projects well exceed $36 million. Actually, our first project exceeds $36 million. A large part of Project 1 will actually be covered through the normal PW process, but there will be a portion of that will be hazard mitigation. And then you've heard us talk about the wastewater plant a lot. I'll just briefly roll through some of these projects, but we are in need of an effluent pump station. Right now, we gravity our discharge into the river. When the river is elevated, that becomes very difficult to sustain operations. So we really do need to install an effluent pump station. The design for that station is complete. We would need to dust the plans off, but that has been an objective of ours for some time. Definitely see the need for it after the flood, and thankfully we were able to sustain operations, but it was very challenging. Secondary water source, you've also heard us talk about this, and this picture is a photo of the pumps that were in the canal. As you well know, the canal dropped below the level that this could sustain our operations, and we actually extended pumps and lines out to the river itself. So we've talked a lot about a secondary water source. It would be a very important project. There's two options. We're fortunate to have a very massive river system. We could either go to the Saluda or the Broad, and there's some routes that have been preliminarily identified, but that's a project that we would support. Access to the Metro wastewater treatment plant, this would be a combined effort between the city and Department of Transportation. Those are DOT roads that lead to our plant. We have been working with Department of Transportation to ensure that this would be a hazard mitigation project for them, but they have asked if the city would help provide the local match. Another project is elevating our pump stations, and this is an example of one that was elevated. You've heard us talk about that being such an important factor to how we withstood the flood. So we would like to elevate some additional pump stations. And then connectivity between the two water plants. We were able to move about 10 million gallons of water from Lake Murray to the canal side of the distribution system. A direct feed between the two plants would really be beneficial for future events or in times of maintenance that may present challenges that are not normal. Stream restoration and retention. This, again, could be a combination of areas impacted by the flood, but possibly some other areas of Columbia that have been very flood prone over the course of our history. An example of that is the Rocky Branch Basin. The early morning hours of the flood, there was significant flooding along Rocky Branch, but fortunately it receded pretty quickly, and it was not quite as devastated as the Gills Creek Basin. But this could be an opportunity not only to address Gills Creek, but also Rocky Branch. And then permanent generators to the wastewater plant. We did lose power at one point of time. We have a secondary feed to the plant, but a permanent generator would be beneficial. And then we have a fire station that was significantly damaged. It is back in operation. They had moved out of it for quite a while, but it's back in operation. Potential of relocating it in close proximity, because we certainly want to comply with the ISO ratings, but possibly a new fire station to replace that one. And then property acquisition. We're going to talk a lot about that, not only with hazard mitigation funding, but with other possible funding sources. This estimate was an early estimate based on what we knew at the time. There will be additional funding sources in addition to hazard mitigation that may be able to address some property acquisitions. Very important to remember, if we buy a property, it cannot be through eminent domain. It has to be voluntary. The property has to remain green space in perpetuity. So if we make that decision, it needs to be a very focused effort, needs to be in collaboration with the county, and we need to know what we're going to do with it long-term, because it does have to be green space.
And
Mr. Bihar.
eligibility.
The question is, if we use the HUD funds instead of the FEMA funds, does the same restriction require?
As far as green space and perpetuity, it does, yes, sir.
So under that tab 4 in your book, under the priority methodology for the state, that spells out some of the criteria with regards to the funding uses. And the city, just the county is doing this, the city will as well also consider some other criteria that we want to address as well. But otherwise, that's the minimum requirement to be eligible for funding for property acquisition.
And we would want to work with the county. The area, Timber Lane, California Avenue, South Beltline, those areas, a lot of that's in and out of the city and county. It would make more sense to go in and look at that as a whole and as a group figure out what to do with that long term, rather than have isolated homes that have been bought out and others that exist.
The whole side of one of the Gills Creek.
Downing Street, I think.
Timberlake.
Okay.
Basically, the folks just left. I don't think it's for me, so.
Most of that's out of the city, isn't it?
Right.
That is the side, that is the city side, yeah.
And then I'm sorry, Ms. Pearl.
On the hazard mitigation, what is the requirement on the match?
It's a 25% match, and you'll see on your spreadsheet the percentage that would be FEMA, which is really hazard mitigation, and then local match.
Okay. And you mentioned on the first one, PW process?
A project worksheet. So the normal process that, after the disaster, that we submit information to FEMA to get reimbursed because the project existed in general. The canal project will have to be enhanced. It can't go back as it was. It wouldn't meet current code. So the reason there would be some hazard mitigation added to the normal PW. And it's the same breakdown as far as funding. It's 75% FEMA and 25% local match, but
But
the
it's different sources of funding.
different sources.
The Project
It's-
Work Program is a different source of money.
It's the original, maybe Keely and those need to
Yeah.
explain it,
Yeah,
but
well-
when we originally, Ms. Blau, started through this process, and you heard us talk about our category A, and we went through that whole, we probably should have put that in here, that would have been good, our category A projects and our category B projects. So some of the same projects that you may see on here is because we're trying to mitigate to make them better. Those project worksheets dealt with just trying to get us back whole and emergency repairs and then getting us back home.
So every project that's performed that we are asking for reimbursement for has to be on a PW, so it's a project worksheet. And then hazard mitigation is on top of that. It's saying either this is not a project this is in addition to those projects just to get us back to whole, and I'm not doing this justice. We're gonna let Keely cover that in just a minute.
In a sense, these are the projects where we want, if there were ever to be a flood or any type of disaster again, we want to put these things in a position where this would never happen again, in other words. Originally, we were just trying to get
Prevention.
back to where, just
Right.
get back normal.
Right.
This is taking it a step further, and I know Keely will do it more justice than we are, but in layman's terms, that's essentially what we're saying.
That's a point of, when we say, so you're talking preventive mitigation? So there are some pockets, we know of, where the flooding occurs, and even prior to the 100 year. Are we going to address those? Because, and some of them, they come through neighborhoods. I'm going through the areas now where one guy just got his fence replaced, and it comes through several streets. How do we?
One of
thinking-
one of our projects is stream restoration and retention.
Right.
This will not address every single flooding problem out there. We have a stormwater CIP that helps us address routine flooding problems. But if there's major flooding that has occurred, whether it was the 1,000-year flood or it's just a repetitive area that floods, we could potentially submit an application for hazard mitigation money to address that. That doesn't mean we'll get funded, but we certainly have it on our list, recognizing that we need to ask for every bit of money that can be made available to us. In addition to this hazard mitigation funding option, there's some other options that you will hear spoken about shortly that may or may not be able to address stream restoration.
Yeah, we looked at a list a couple of weeks ago. I think it was, the CIP project, storm drains. They're on that list, and I believe we're not certain where the dollars would come from. So my question is, now that we do have some funds, would we not elevate those in terms of priority?
Well, we have potential for funds. We don't have funds yet.
And there's gotta be a connection to the flood.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, they were,
to
they
this
were,
event.
Specific event.
okay, well, we.
Well, and
talked
if they're on the list you're referring to, they're in the stormwater CIP already.
Right.
They may be a few years out, because the stormwater CIP is quite massive, and there's limited funds every year to address those issues.
The only reason I say that is because there are some, they were flooding and causing floods before the 100-year flood. That's the dilemma there.
Maybe after the meeting, if we can get a list of those,
Yeah.
we'll certainly take a
Okay.
look and see where they fall in the CIP.
That's good.
I asked about the
Let's
match.
see if there's some
Yes,
damage
ma'am.
from the flood too. So there may also be some effects of the flood there as well. Ms. Blau?
Can the block grant money be used for match?
Yes, ma'am, it can. The last project you'll see on our list is some enhancements to our emergency operating center, and won't go into much detail there. I think we were very capable and did a remarkable job. There could be some enhancements that would have made that process easier. I don't think the end result would have been any different. I think it could have been a little easier to navigate. And then the summary of hazard mitigation requests, $175 million with $131,250 being the 75% match from FEMA or state. And remember, there's only $37 million available through this funding source. So we're going to submit applications recognizing that there's not enough money there to fund all of them. But if for some reason money was made available, our match would be $43 million.
And again, that's not funding that we have, this is things.
Right, this is an application that's due April 5th, so we plan on submitting an application for each one of these projects. It will be October 5th before we know for certain, before the money's actually made available for the projects that receive funding.
Well, actually, yeah, April 5th is the pre-application, September, and then October 5th is the final application deadline, so.
So when would you know?
Well, the state will not know, when we say $36 million available, that's an estimate based on current numbers associated with the flood. It'll be October 5th before they know their final number. So we won't know approval until that period of time, and we'll ask Landmark to talk about that timing when Keeley gets up here, because they've worked a lot of other events, but likely it will be October or later before we know. Ms. Plow?
Couple of questions. The first one is on stream restoration. How did we come up with that number?
Some of these are ballpark numbers. There has, pre-flood, there was a lot of interest in addressing some issues along Rocky Branch. 2 detention facilities being proposed or being looked at to see if they would make a difference. And just recognizing that there's a lot of work to do with stream restoration. There's really no, I can't point to 5 different projects that we would fund with that right now. We would.
Seems like a small number. That's what I'm worried about.
And it may be. We may want to elevate that. These numbers were early numbers following the event when we started pulling a list of projects together.
It's only a dozen city properties.
Right.
And that is a public right away.
And I want to go back to this chart. Only 5% of the money will be mitigation planning. Actually, the other would be 45%. Out of $36 million statewide, we're not going to get everything. So we will have to prioritize this list ourselves. I would submit everything, but we certainly have to prioritize it and decide what's most important to us. There are some other funding sources that Keeley will talk about shortly that may help address some of these issues as well. So we'll ask her to come up
Yeah,
here
I guess
shortly.
my other question, and maybe she'll address it when she comes forward, but we got, this is enhancement kind of dollars, taking beyond the basic, getting us, there's another funding source that I know we've accessed some money from FEMA already that will help get us to where we are today. These are designed to take us beyond that.
These are designed to take us beyond. The funding source you're talking about is probably the expedited review of Cat B, or the public assistance that we have already received some of the benefit, and that's a PW. You heard us talk about a PW. That was made available through the PW process. I'm going to ask Keeley to get up here. So.
And that's, how much money have we already received under that?
Almost 5 million.
So, well, let me figure out exactly where you want to start here. The FEMA public assistance dollars are those dollars that are going to get you back to where you were at the time of the storm. So they're to make repairs to public facilities to get you back to where you were at the time of the storm. So far, we've received, I don't know, about $6 or $7 million of that so far. And that was really for the Category B, or emergency protective measures. We have since submitted additional documentation, additional invoices, additional scopes of work in order to support amending those initial requests. So we're continuing to develop those project worksheets, which are individual grants that are prepared and submitted to FEMA for review and approval.
Were any of the $6 to $7 million, were those associated with the canal primarily, or were they associated with the impact residentially?
Well, all of those dollars, the public assistance dollars, are for city-owned facilities. So it's strictly for city-owned facilities. So it's public assistance.
So all $6 to $7 million has gone to public-owned facilities.
Right. This is a reimbursement program, so the city spent money to protect its property, to mitigate the emergency, and so they have been reimbursed some of those funds, yes.
That would be staff for, say,
It could be
Robert's
labor,
staff.
materials, other
Police.
contractors who were sandbagging and all the other activities associated with the EOC, for example, so.
Majority of it was the canal and the work done at the canal, the rock, all the materials.
most of
and
it,
stuff.
I would think,
So
yeah.
that was the total category. That's just what we got from the economic project worksheet.
Correct.
That's 75% of the 75. We'll still get more of those funds.
That's right. A supplement was submitted once the additional, I guess, invoices and, information was provided.
That's reimbursing us for expenses we incurred.
Right,
Right.
and that's the reimbursing of 75%.
That's right.
We asked for 90% reimbursement. Is that still pending, or?
That's as much as we can get, yeah.
I
We
mean,
haven't gotten any feedback on anything
on
other than
any
the
of that,
75,
we just don't know.
25.
Are we expecting it, or do we think it's not likely?
It's done rarely, I think. It's
Yeah, I
rare.
think from the federal level, it's done rarely, and it's usually determined based on the size of the event. But it's this, the state is going to, they're responsible to help with the 25% cost share, and we have not heard yet
What they're doing.
what the state plans to do.
Any idea on time frame that we'd know what the state's plan?
I don't,
We've had our legislative aides making contact with, the staff over there that's helping on the Senate and the House side with flood recovery. And I think they're just still receiving information. I mean, when we talked to them at least a week ago, they were wanting us to, send them updated numbers, which we've done that. So, but we haven't heard anything any differently, Ms. Platt.
Okay, thank you.
And we've certainly continued to make the case that for nothing other than the canal because of the impact of the whole Midlands. It's not just Columbia.
Sure.
And the Metro wastewater treatment plant for that matter.
right. When the state makes its determination, it'll be statewide. Let's see here. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about all of the various funding sources that are becoming available and will be part of our flood recovery program. But I did want to talk to you a little bit about the stage that we're in right now. We are still very much in the planning phase for this program. And the reason why I say that that's important is because we're still setting goals for the program and really trying to answer the question, where do we want to be at the end of the day? We're receiving, or the opportunity to receive, a number of different funding sources that have specific purposes. And I think in order to make best use of that, we need to know, what our ultimate goals are, so that we're not selecting projects that have minimal impact, but together they can give us a greater benefit at the end of the day. So an example on the goal setting is some cities might decide that they don't want to have any out-of-pocket expenses. So they organize their projects and their programs to, make sure that their cost share is covered. Others take this opportunity to invest for the future because these funds come, some of them are free, or some of them are when I say cheap, low interest rate dollars that come available for you to invest for the future. So it's really sort of a combination of knowing what your overall goals are. Once we kind of get that down, then we can identify projects. And as you can see, the staff has already begun to identify projects based on need. And so there's a number of lists of projects, potential projects for hazard mitigation funds, for CDBGR funds, for, and of course, the projects that receive direct damage as a result of the storm. We're setting criteria and prioritizing the projects based on the goals. Or let me say this, each funding source has particular requirements, and we want to be in compliance with all of those requirements. And so once we establish the funding requirements, then we'll establish all the funding sources and then begin to match those sources to the uses or to the projects, that is. And then that's really the process of formulating individual projects. So I was listening to the conversation earlier. There's a number of different ways to go. And so with all of the different sources, I think in the list, there's at least 10 that we're talking about right now. Some of them are more restrictive than others, and some of them have very specific uses. So once we kind of get clear about where we want to be at the end of the day, then we can begin to identify projects and then match multiple sources in some cases to fund each project. So we have worked on other programs where they've had, used 8 different sources on a single project because that was a high priority. So this is a process, I guess, of determining that. And once we set that, then we can begin to really execute the program. And so I just wanted to, I guess, shape the conversation that we've got to get through the rest of our planning process in order to have successful projects. So with that, there's a list in your books on 7, I think tab 7, that describes kind of a high-level summary of all of the various sources of funding that are being made available on the program and the specific uses of each one. I will not go into particular detail on each one, but just to let you know that these are all the different sources that are coming available.
Just a question.
Yes.
Some of these listed as grants.
Yes.
Grant assistance. Does that, I take it that means they're highly competitive, or coming off of a flood such as the one we've had, what are our chances of getting the dollars in a timely manner if we did in fact apply for it?
Well, not all of them are competitive. Some of them are being made available to you. There is a cost share associated with those.
Yeah.
So as long as we're presenting an eligible project, it gets funded. So some of them are automatic. Some of them are competitive. The 404 mitigation program is a competitive program, and that's the one where the state receives the funds, and there is a process for which you submit.
They go to the state, not to the local?
It goes to the state will make a determination, and then they will determine who gets funding for those 404 projects.
Okay.
So that's just to give you an example about that particular program. So yeah, some of them do have some competitive criteria, but most of them don't. Most of them are, as long as the projects are eligible projects, then they're related to the disaster, then we prepare the documentation and submit.
Ms. Platt?
Are you going to talk about the new allocation of block grant money?
Sure, I'll tell you.
How that will be administered, or, I mean, I feel like we need a in-depth presentation about that.
Yeah, I would recommend that we maybe do that separately because it can be relatively complicated. Not only that, we have subject matter experts in CDBG within our team, and I'd really like for them to be present to kind of talk about the nuances of that program. But I will tell you this, our first step is to develop an action plan, and so we're working with the staff to get started on that. So the action plan is really our first step in terms of accessing these dollars. We have about 90 days to produce that plan, and then HUD has to review and approve it.
I have an interest in that also.
Ms. Fox?
That's,
What's the citizen participation part of development of this action plan?
There is a plan at the bottom of the page. There's a steps to funding that describes the process, but there is a citizen participation process that's a part of the plan. So it is made available for citizen review and comment. Do you want to?
No citizen participation in the preparation of the plan?
Yes, ma'am. We can do it both ways, but yes, the CAC and public process will happen. We will have public input sessions, just like we do for when we do our action plan and when we do our CAPER. Yes, ma'am.
And my understanding is these dollars don't come with the typical block grant limitations to it. Income limitations.
Well, 30% of the funds, 70% of the funds have to go for people at 80% below the median income.
30%?
70%, and that's always with all of our CDBG dollars. 70% of our money must be utilized for people 80% and below the area median income. That's how we're able to use the funds. We've used the funds for our facade programs and stuff, and we used it downtown. We were able to do that because 30% of the money can be used, right?
But I would caution us, as I think Keely was indicating, we've had we just were able to talk about this publicly yesterday.
Right.
So to be able to digest the guidelines and the criteria
And
with the staff.
we don't
and
have the
present it
criteria yet.
responsibly
And the possibilities.
and the
Right.
possibilities is very important. And while I certainly know that community participation is important, I do think that these dollars for the disaster recovery, we as a staff have to really help the council once we hear directives from you all in how we need to approach this funding. So I've talked to the staff about the community input piece, but I think we really need to understand it before we suggest that there's going to be a widespread, the same type of community participation that's with our normal allocation every year. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that yet because I don't know enough about what the guidelines are.
And the guidelines are yet to be published.
When
They
do we
still have to
expect
come
them?
out.
Do we know?
I talked to Brad yesterday, and he said that it'll be in the next few weeks, but, even then, of course, we had the 90 days to do. And this is our current action plan, so we'll have 90 days. And our current action plan for 16-17 is also due in May. So they look like they will be kind of due simultaneously. Then HUD has 45 days to review it before they even send the contracts, as they do for all of our other funding, to Ms. Wilson for her to sign. So it will probably be the end of July, the first part of August, before we can even start allocating funds, just like we do with our annual allocation. There's a process
Sure,
to
but we
it.
certainly don't have to wait 90 days to respond, right?
We have to respond in 90 days, isn't that
You
what
have
you're
to
saying?
buy.
We have to have the action
You-
plan.
Right, you have to have an action
What I'm saying is
plan.
that we can respond in a shorter period of time.
Oh,
It's very detailed, so, we have to make.
What I'm saying is that we can respond in a shorter period of time. What I'm saying is that we will respond in a shorter period of time.
well, and
Well, that wasn't a question, that was a statement.
I just,
Yeah, let me,
as Ms. Wilson said, I would like for us to be thoughtful. And, this is an opportunity.
Absolutely.
So I want us to make sure that we're collectively
Oh,
staff,
absolutely. And-
council, citizen, everybody's,
Absolutely.
And-
But it'll be
and
shorter than
that's-
90 days.
Agreed
That's the
upon.
statement that I want to make is I think the public has a right to be part of the discussions about how we move forward. Particularly in District 4, they are the ones so dramatically impacted. I mean, there are hundreds of people that are still out of their homes. Hundreds.
Absolutely.
And living with family and friends or, staying, renting an apartment or whatever. I really don't know how many of them are making ends meet now. But all of that to say, I do agree with everyone in terms of this is an opportunity. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to take a negative and make it a positive. I hope that we will think broadly as we look at how we might maximize the dollars and make, whatever areas that have been impacted better. And the other question that I have that I want to go on record for is sediment removal in lakes, whether they're public or private lakes. It was sediment from upstream that came into those private lakes, dam retrofitting where necessary, and I don't think we have any dams except on the fort that need to be built. And I don't know if we are working with the fort on what their needs are, because they're inside the city, so that would be another question to come to grips with.
They can get that money faster.
We got.
I doubt it.
I'm short on time, so let's keep.
Just
on.
20 minutes.
Just one statement on this. I think this is a very good briefing. And part of the challenge, I know for me, is to understand the different components of this. There's some moving targets with some timelines. And I appreciate everybody's efforts to stay on top of this. One of the things that I've been confronted with this week is that, and we do understand how the lower part was really devastated. We're all out there during the rain and the water flow, but there's still some few little pockets of individuals and I'm being asked about the list of the people in other parts of the city that were impacted, and are they not? I'm not trying to be specific about any particular dollar category, but we need to make sure that we don't overlook them. And I heard, for example, on the radio, or television, I think this morning, there's another pot of dollars that's available for organizations. They're probably nonprofits. So it's a question of, are we gonna follow that to see if we can channel some of our folks into that? But there are some nonprofits that stepped up to the plate during the flooding. Just want to make sure that we're still in a position to address some of those folks that are going to step up and say that they were impacted, whether we have them, they're on the list or not. We are aware of them. If we can make sure that happens, I think that'll also help us cover the whole 9 yards.
And real briefly, I'm going to ask Matt Bennett to step up, CEO of United Way. He showed up early hours of the storm, was very instrumental in a lot of ways from the very beginning, and I know that they've continued to be to our community. So do you want to step up for a minute and talk about United Way?
I was in 2 news broadcasts that I had one day a Blue Cross Blue Shield shirt on, and another day I had a Comet shirt on, so my staff went out and made us all buy United Way shirts. So next disaster, which I hope I won't be here for, some of our staff will be wearing United Way shirts, but in any event. United Way has funded about $500,000 so far into flood relief. We received about $1 million in designated flood relief funding. That is in addition to our normal campaign, Mr. Davis. We have spent some of our own unrestricted funds on flood relief efforts, as well as we're beginning to spend the flood relief efforts. We're working with St. Bernard Project and Homeworks and started work with them back in December. We've got 12 houses targeted, some of those in the city of Columbia, that are being repaired now. We just released additional funding, about $190,000 to St. Bernard Project, Homeworks, St. Bernard to do mold remediation training for other VOADs or organizations active in disaster relief. We are also have provided some funding to Salvation Army to provide gap support for housing for families that were displaced by the flooding. When we look at criteria, to address your specific question, when we look at criteria, our money is filling the gap where FEMA insurance don't meet the needs of the repair structure. What we're finding is FEMA is providing about 10 to 13% of the market cost for repairing homes damaged in the floods. So we're working with nonprofit organizations like the VOADs, like St. Bernard Project. We think we can go in and repair those homes for less than market cost, but there's still a significant gap between what insurance is paying and what FEMA has paid. We are not extending, none of the homes that we are repairing will go beyond the previous condition of the house. Most of them will be short of the previous condition of the house because we are just responsible for making them habitable again. So sometimes when people had accessories in their homes that they won't replace, the resources that we're providing are not going to address those kinds of specialty items in the homes. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any idea, Mac, whether you're working with some folks on Downing?
There are a couple of, in the little handout, there are a couple of, there's a map that shows the 12 houses that were originally identified, Ms. Plow. I'm not sure, I know there are a couple in that Downing Street area. I'm not sure if those are houses that are on Downing or not.
Where are the houses identified that you're helping? Which street?
This map. You may be looking at the city's report. They look kind of alike, but there's a United Way report with a woman's picture on the front, and then there's a map on the third page of that.
I would just ask in particular.
I can find that out if there are any.
If there's any way I can continue to talk about my folks on Downing Avenue that, you know, are living here, there, and yonder, so.
All right.
I would make one other comment, Deborah, if I may. Last year, there were 43 FEMA disasters that were declared. 48% of the claims for FEMA support have come from South Carolina. When we see about the floods in Texas and Missouri that followed our flooding here, when we see about tornadoes that came after the flooding here, all of those things combined are adding up to what disaster we experienced in South Carolina. So we still got a long way to go in South Carolina, and this should be treated as a much more significant disaster than, you know, the national press was here for a few days. That was great, but they were gone. And we've still got a lot of people that need our assistance and will need our assistance for a long time.
Thank you, Mac, for
Thank you,
what you're
ma'am.
doing.
Thank you.
When we went to the Cross Hills neighborhood, I talked about the fact that Friday, we have applications due, our funding applications. We didn't open up the notice of funds available. When we did our substantial amendment, we specified that we would work with agencies that could provide funding to people for flood, or it had to be flood-related if it was a city project. There are some city buildings that we are going to work with that had significant flood damage, but for our 16, 17 CDBG dollars. So, Ms. Plow, St. Bernard Parish will be applying and giving us an application on Friday. And when they do so, I will have a list of where they plan on utilizing those materials, and I will let all of you know as we receive the applications on Friday exactly all of the people who were invited to participate, where they're going to use the money and how they're going to use the money. So I can make that available to you. I think it's $1,100,000.
And that money's used in what fashion?
That's CDBG 1617.
But how would the money go out?
It depends on the group. Some of them are city projects, so obviously that's internal. But for St. Bernard Parish, they were going to give us a funding application for how much they needed for materials to do so many houses for 1 year. So they may be asking us for $200,000 or $300,000 to purchase materials.
City, what's the Homeworks, that group?
Homeworks was going to defer to St. Bernard Parish. They asked us to give their money to them. They called and asked if we would do that. They said that they felt they had a lot more capacity than they did. So they asked us to revert their money to St. Bernard.
How'd your home applications look?
We got.
Robust?
There were 5, yes, sir, and they,
Yeah, I'm sure.
There's a lot more request than there is funds, but that's a good thing. We have $1.2 million that is available in home dollars for new projects, and so we had 5 applicants, so which is good. So I haven't finished totaling them yet, but one application I looked at was $700,000 all by itself. So I've started.
On the new home dollars, how does that break out between renter and homeowner?
I think all of them, Ms. Plow. One of them is a 50-unit apartment complex. They're all rental. No, they're all rental, I do believe. I haven't looked at all of them. They just came in last night, 5 o'clock. So that was the deadline. So I'll be happy to break that out and show you too. But I do believe that the requests are for rental. I don't think there's a home ownership project, but there may be.
We have another portion of this that's really important for you to hear, so I want Keely to come back in and wrap this up as far as the funding matrix.
10 minutes.
Okay.
Turn into a pumpkin.
Also in section 7, there are a couple of sheets that look like this. These are the funding matrix where we've taken all of the various funding sources that are kind of down on one side, and then all of the potential projects across the top, and then just identified at a high level which projects could be funded by which source. And there's 3 different sheets in there. One is focused on the FEMA Public Assistance Program, one on mitigation, and then one on CDBG dollars. So I just wanted you guys to see the depth of our recovery program.
And the public assistance is our project worksheet.
Correct. That's the program that we're the furthest along with, making site visits and preparing project worksheets and gathering documentation. That's the one that's taken most of the staff's time to date.
Is this a document that you'll do periodic reports that'll show, it's kind of hard to see all the little details down here, but where we'll know what request we made, what dollar amounts received, and then how much of that was dispersed?
Yes, so as we get further along, once the projects are defined, there'll be what's called a sources and uses report for each project. That will tell us which scope of work is being funded by which particular source of funding. And so, we'll be able to really report on it at a granular level, even down to the reimbursements that are coming in by source for those programs that are reimbursement programs. So we have a pretty detailed financial analysis system to manage all that.
what's your experience with how long the reimbursement, are all these programs reimbursement?
Not all of them, but I would say that the FEMA Public Assistance Program, which is one of the largest funding sources you're going to have within this program, is so far it's about $56 million. It probably is going to go up. That is a reimbursement program. So it depends on how quickly the state turns around request, which could be 30 days or so. You know, we're not really sure yet.
But I'm just, you know, the question for me comes to cash flow.
Yeah.
If we have to incur these costs, where would those dollars come from, and how long would we have to be out there for them?
Right. Great question. And yeah, we do have a process for managing that. And our working group has been discussing the amount of funds that we actually want to spend for reimbursement and, spend on projects and wait for reimbursement. So it'll be part of a schedule of the projects and the cycle of actually getting reimbursed. So it's a whole, we can really go into detail on this. There's a whole plan, a whole system. Joe, do you want to mention anything about that?
Oh, the answer is varies.
Mike, Joe, thank you.
The answer varies from project to project. Depending on the source of funding, the duration of the project, we might be able to put together a project worksheet and say for completed projects, we have lots of projects that are completed. We might be able to put that together, submit it, and in 45 days be getting money back. The canal, for example, that's going to be our biggest out-of-pocket expense for the city. We're going to have to encumber the funds for design and then construction before we get reimbursement back. Reimbursement for the canal is going to come monthly for the duration of the construction. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. Typically, when we submit something for reimbursement, you're looking at 30 to 45 days for FEMA to review it and get it back to us. That's not a standard. That's based on our experience in dealing in the past with them. Sometimes it's quicker for a smaller, less complex project. Sometimes it's longer for a more complex project. We build in an encumbrance model, so we'll be able to forecast monthly, quarterly, however we want to look at it, from the end of March through the end of the program. What is the city going to be out month by month? So, I'm going to make up an example. So in April 2016, we forecast the city's going to need $450,000 to start executing these projects. In May, it might be $900,000, and so on. And we're also, as part of the model, there's reimbursements associated with that. When we hit the milestones in the project, we can apply for reimbursement from FEMA, and we get money back. So it's kind of a rolling, like she said, we may be able to use some of that reimbursement money to fund a new project instead of coming out of pocket with more money, depending on how fast.
I guess so. The question I have of our staff is, as you are preparing the budget for next year, obviously, there has to be some ability to have rolling capital.
That's correct. That's correct. And I was asked today to start putting together what is that number for this project. So we're working on doing that, and hopefully we'll get it right.
Good luck.
We're thankful for the immediate
Immediate
amount
help.
that we
Yeah,
got,
helped a lot,
but
yeah.
it's not, that's not certainly the end all.
That actually completes our prepared material. We can certainly talk about if we're going to actually schedule a bus tour, what those tentative dates would be, and if y'all have any other questions for any of
I think Ms.
us.
Plow has discussed with, most of her colleagues, Wednesday, March 9th, Missy.
Okay.
I will not be in town on March 9th, but the staff, we'd already put together the tour, so the staff is more than capable of going ahead, taking you all on the tour. If that's the date that y'all have decided upon, I guess we would just need to know the time of day.
How much time do you think we need to allow? And
We were counting on an hour to an hour and a half, targeting an hour, knowing that it was probably going to be an hour and a half. And Robert says maybe even 2. It really depends on the start and stops, and our intent was not to open the door, to seal it shut and stop and talk, but then to keep going.
We'll be there when we're there. We're not stopping.
We did it in the car today, and it was about an hour and 25 minutes.
Okay.
In your car, that means 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours in the bus.
Howard, does that work for you?
Yeah, we've got 5:30 council at large meeting,
Oh, we do?
just Tamika and I,
Oh,
for the open house for.
oh, okay, so we'd need to do it earlier.
If we can do it at 3
Yep.
or something like that.
Give me the heads up.
What time?
Wednesday at 3?
Yeah, 3 o'clock.
Let's do it at 2 to give us some leeway in case we,
Spring break next week.
so it's perfect timing to do it.
And I'm
Thank you.
leaving town after that.
Okay, 2 o'clock Wednesday.
And the other thing that I would ask is that we schedule a time for your block grant, community development block grant expert to come in and help us dig a little deeper into the $20 million. So the sooner we can do that, the better with the 90-day clock ticking.
Okay. Jeff, did you want to say anything? All right. I thought I was getting a cue that you did, sorry.
You said 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. 2 o'clock on March the 9th.
And we will pick up from the parking lot between City Hall and the county courthouse.
Okay, anything else? Do we know where the mirror is? Supposed to be leaving. Okay, what's next then?
Executive session.
Ah, all right.
Let's rock and roll.
You want a
Okay.
motion to go into executive session? Who wants to make the motion?
So move.
You're the pro tem.
So move.
I'm not going to make
Wait a
the
minute, you
motion.
gotta read that stuff.
Missy.
Make a motion to go into executive session.
Hold on a second.
Discuss,
Hey, guys.
That's okay, I was about to say, you can, they're going to executive session, so y'all can cut me off now.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, talk to you later.
Pursuant to negotiations on proposed contractual arrangements, we have 2 items that we'll take up in executive session.
You have to say them.
Huh?
You have to
Oh, I
say
have to
them.
say
Yes,
what?
ma'am.
Oh, the
Say 'em.
hydro plant and Klein redevelopment project.
Thank you.
Now, where are we
Okay, if
meeting? Here
the
at City Hall
clerk
again?
would, yes, for 2 o'clock.
So moved.
Clerk, would call the roll? Sam, you second the
Second.
motion? to-
Second, yeah.
Okay.
Present.
Mo, yes.
Aye, aye.
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 It's not cooperative. It could possibly be misconstrued.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We know that.
I will never admit that to my students.
No, you don't admit it to anyone.
Heavy, heavy, heavy.